Hello everybody and welcome, and thank you for coming to this EMCC Global GPS Dialogue. Thrilled to have Petra and also Cecile join us today from Germany and Canada. They're going to be leading a fantastic conversation around our competency, EMCC competencies. So without further ado, I shall hand you straight over to Cecile and Petra.
All right, thank you very much. It's great seeing some faces that we know. Hello to everybody that we know, and hello to everybody that we don't know yet. And we are looking forward to meeting you today. Competencies as a doorway to development. And the first thing that we want to do is give you a little disclaimer. I had this conversation with Nicola when we came in early to prepare for the session. And I said, I hope people are not coming to learn everything about competencies and think that Cecile and I are the expert on behavioral markers and competencies. Because what we want to do is we want to actually propose the competence framework that the EMCC has developed as a tool to you to use for your own development. And in order to do that for ourselves, we have developed behavioral markers. We will use those in the session, and when we have we will invite you to a discussion. And that might go two ways. We might go the way that we are inviting you, or you might find that you have more ideas or don't agree with what we did, then welcome to have that discussion. We are not saying in any way that what we did is the complete answer or the end of the discussion. It is what we came up with at the time that we did this. So let's have a good dialogue around this, using the tool or developing the tool, whichever way that discussion will go. And that was our little disclaimer at the beginning.
So, you know, we're here today because while we were going through supervision training, we worked together to find ways to really develop our skill set in a way that made sense. And so for us, this became a framework to develop from, and to sort of really consider, what does my idea of my best work look like, and how can I bring the best of me into supervision? And so, you know, I use competencies as a form of reflection, and it's really important for me to engage in that framework through discussion and preparation and sharing my understanding with other people. And that's really what we want for you today. Oh, and I should probably say I'm Cecile, and I'm calling in today from Canada, and I live on the traditional territory of the Ktunaxa Kinbasket people in southeastern British Columbia. And Petra, over to you.
Yes, so I'm obviously Petra. I live in Germany, just outside Frankfurt. We have actually never met in person. We met in our supervision training program last year. And I would like to say that I did this work for all the noble reasons that Cecile just mentioned. I think I really jumped at the opportunity when we were discussing competencies, and I thought it was a great learning opportunity. I was curious. I wanted to work with Cecile, and I said, I will do it before really thinking it through, because we ended up spending a lot of time on it, and we had great discussions and developed our friendship over this. So I'm ultimately really grateful for two reasons that we did this work together. Mm-hmm. So happy to share this with you today. And in order to get you a little bit more, Nicola is going to pull up a poll, and we would like you to answer two questions.
Yeah, so, you know, many of you, 3/4 of us believe that that development is more about focusing on our strengths than on areas that are not strengths. And most people are sort of like, when it comes to competencies, you know, those there's a few people who don't pay a lot of attention, and a few people who pay a lot of attention. So thank you for sharing that It's also interesting that we have people from all over the world. So it's really nice to see so many faces from so many places in front of us.
All right. So when we developed this paper, or the behavioral markers that we are sharing with you last year, we were a little bit like that baby down there, starting out our first steps in supervision. And at the time, the question that we approached it with was surely more, what does supervision look like? Slowly it got into what does good supervision look like, and now we have quite some experience under our belts. And I was even recently awarded my ESIA. So we are not where we were anymore. We are in a different place. And still, we find that revisiting the framework makes sense. And this the picture that we have there is to illustrate a didactic concept of a spiral curriculum. And the idea behind that is that you can really teach any concept at any level of development if you package it the right way. So you can teach a kindergartner and a first grader and a second grader and a fifth grader and a 13th or a 12th grader the same concept, but you have to package it differently so it's adequate for their level of development. And looking at the spiral approach, we thought this is really how it is with our interaction with the competence framework. It's not that somebody is packaging something to teach us something, but every time that we look at it with, as our experience grows and with the situation that changes and the systemic influences that change, we read it differently and it informs us differently and it brings us new insights every single time. So that's why we keep coming back to it.
And you know, our understanding of supervision is also that supervision has these three functions. And the first one is that forming function, where it is about professional and personal learning and development. And so when we look at that function, you know, competencies help us understand what professional practice looks like and what the expectations are that we can have of ourselves to provide in any given session. There's also that assurance function of supervision, which is around norming and assuring professionalism, integrity, and ethical practice. And again, the competencies help us understand what that would look like. And then lastly, the restoring aspect of supervision, where it is about rest, refueling, and celebrating and honoring the work that we do when we supervise clients, that is also available for us to understand through the lens of the competencies. And so, you know, the question that keeps arising as Petra and I use this framework is, what does good supervision look like for me today? And good for us is defined as, what is the work that I need to do to work at the level where I am honoring my skill and my professionalism, and what is the next step? And then the other part of this is, what does it mean to be competent? Because those sort of set the brackets between which we want to move, where we're elegantly working within a competency framework at a high level of professionalism and with some elegance. You know, I once worked with a surgeon, and one of the instructions he always used to give trainees was, if it's not elegant, you're doing something wrong. And so not that sometimes things aren't elegant, but that aspiration of what could elegant work look like when we look at the competency framework and what it makes available for us to smoothly move as we work with clients.
At this point, before I explain the slide, I remember that we originally didn't do this, the two of us, we originally did this with a third colleague. And you will find, because the work originated from the three of us, you will find in the document his name, Alan Myers. He was also in the same training cohort as we were. And unfortunately, he was not available to prepare this session and be in this session with us, which is why you are meeting the two of us. But that's why there's a discrepancy between meeting the two of us and when you read the document, seeing three names in there. And I'm sorry we forgot to mention this before, but that might explain it. So what will you find in the document? It's a Word document, and I'm sure all of you know the brochure that the EMCC has up for download, and that's really beautiful with different colors and the stones in the background. And here you have just a little piece screenshotted out of that brochure. And what we did is we took the competency, every single one of the 8, and it has every single one of them has a header and then a main description, which you will find in the first 2 lines of our document. And then we took the single competencies that are numbered underneath. And for each of those, so at the lowest level of detail, we went and we thought through, okay, what is a behavior that would show us what this would actually look like? And at first, when we read it, it was funny because the competencies themselves have many verbs in them. So when you first read them, you think, oh, check, check, check. It is a description of a behavior. But then when you start digging a little bit deeper, you find, no, some of them are not really telling you how to behave. So we tried, and hopefully with your help, we can keep making this better and more concise, to find actual behaviors that you can see, observe, to describe how you would see and show that competencies. We started out, and the people who will later work on competence one will find that there are contrary behaviors, and you will say yawn, because you will find that the contrary behavior actually is just the opposite of the affirming behavior. So at some point in our work, we just stopped doing that, and we defined that a contrary behavior, so a behavior that would be opposite to the competence, is the opposite of an affirming behavior, unless we mentioned something explicitly. And in some cases we did, but most cases it's just the opposite. And then you will find then a line in our table for each one of those numbered competencies. So we go on to the next and the next, and it turned out to be quite a thick document. And you don't need to be scared, because we will break you up later, and you will only, even if you haven't read it before the session, you will be able to read the little piece that you will need and access and fully participate in the discussion.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Petra. And one other thing we need to say is that these behaviors are behaviors we talked about and discussed and kicked around that we believe demonstrate those competencies. The EMCC have neither endorsed them, and nor is it an official stance of the EMCC. So that is important to say as well, that this is just our idea. And we would love to hear from you if what's missing, and what would you add, and what would you change? Because this, in our mind, is a living document that we use for our own learning. So what we're going to do next is we're going to send you into breakouts to dig into one of these competencies. So Nicola has set you, broken you up into breakout rooms, and you'll see that your breakout room is named with the competency that we'd like you to consider. So if you're in competency 1, then just look at the behaviors under competency 1, and you're all grown-ups, you'll do what you'll do. But what we'd like you to answer is, which behaviors come naturally to you? Which ones do you see yourself use more frequently as you supervise? And which behaviors are a challenge, and what makes them more challenging? And so we just want you to have that conversation and think through, as you think about either your global supervision practice or just the last few sessions you've had, or the last session that really disrupted your world. You get to pick how you want to address this. But those are the questions we have for you. We're going to send you to the breakout for 20 minutes. And then when we come back from the breakout, we're going to give you about a minute to just put your thoughts in the chat so that we can also, so that everybody has a chance to contribute.
Okay, voiceover time. I've edited the behavioural markers identified by Cecile and Petra with their colleague Alan Lee Myers into some slides which follow on now. Here are the competency headings themselves, and I've added a link at the bottom to where you can download the whole framework from the EMCC Global Bookshop for free. These following slides contain the tables that the session participants are discussing in their breakout rooms. You will see that the competency itself is on the left, and then the affirming behaviour identified in the next column, the contrary behaviour in the next, and notes where available are on the right. The competencies are taken in turn from 1 to 8. Each slide is 8 seconds long, and the whole deck is just over 5 minutes. You can pause the video to read the slides if they're going too quickly, or if you wanted to go ahead to the discussion, then scroll ahead to the 21-minute mark.
Hi everybody, come back again. We're just going to give you just a quiet minute just to record in the chat some of the thoughts that you had while you're in your breakout rooms.
Acknowledges the limitations, struck a chord of dissonance, would propose replacing it with all right. We can slowly move to Gudrun if you want to unmute yourself.
We had the thought, and I might add my ideas because she had another thought as well, that it's important to look on the culture and to include the cultural differences in the contract, especially into the written contract, not the informal contract as well, to be honest. But it's law differences, it's time differences, because people are there are areas in the world where time is not, they are not that punctual, for example, because it's just their culture. It's chronicle time differences, or what you call it in English, I don't know anymore. So we talked about that it's important to see who you're working with, and to look at the law as well, that you when you get into a conflict, you have to know that your contract is legally safe, so to say. That's were things we were talking about, and yeah. And I had another idea, and of course that's how you work as well, because, for example, in the Asian countries, and I think parts of the Soviet Union or is the same, they won't say no bluntly normally, so they describe it. And so it's important to know that, and to perhaps make phrases perhaps in the informal contract as well, to allow them to say no and to be blunt or frank, even though they are not used to it, and they might think, oh gosh, what have I done? But just to express this.
Yeah, so exploring cultural differences in the informal contract, but also being aware of cultural and legal differences and time zones and whatnot on the written contract side. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Which other thoughts did you have on facilitation of development or providing support? Any thoughts from those rooms that were interesting to share with everybody?
Well, I can share, or Maureen, you can go as well. It's okay. You know, because it takes me really too much time to write this all down. So I don't know if it's and Diane.
Just talk.
Okay, so basically we didn't get very far, but of these capability indicators, we got through first few, and some of these affirmative behaviors, we just, I mean, it goes without saying, like how could you even do supervision without it? And then thinking of some negative behaviors, yeah, I don't know, for some things we can say that maybe some supervisors could be ignorant to the, let's say, coaching, mentoring, knowledge and skills and behaviors of the client, but we cannot even imagine how would the supervision start without knowing who is in front of you and what kind of skills and behaviors they have. So I think, Diane, maybe you can bring something into, because I think we didn't really get very far.
One of the things that we talked about was having a certain level of curiosity, you know, that we'd like to say that supervisor naturally brings or knows to bring. Perhaps being a newer supervisor, that may still be under development, but we were talking about how important that is in developing your curiosity and using that to do some, you know, deeper reflection, deeper work in that way.
Mm-hmm. And somebody was going to jump in?
Yeah, I was going to jump in, but it's from group 3, competence 3. And I was with Lily and Jasmine, and we had a very, at least I felt, enriching discussion. We could have gone on for hours. Provide support, psychological safety, really, really, really intensely important. And just some of the things I did write in there, but, you know, what does it mean to feel safe? And then obviously add the dimensions, cultural, cognitive, etc. And what does it mean to have your input valued? So that whole really looking at what each person needs and wants, those, you know, human hungers. And I think that maybe just asking permission and making sure that it's explicit in the mutual agreement. Contracting sounds confining, but, you know, what do you need and what do you want? And, you know, really, so very interesting discussion. Thank you.
This reminds me, and maybe Cecile, we should at some point add this in our opposing behaviors. I attended a group supervision once where the supervisor said, and we agree that this is a safe environment. And I felt like, no, just agreeing that this is a safe environment does not make me feel safe. So I appreciated the way that you phrased it.
And let me add just for a second. It's having had that similar experience. The supervisor wanted to do a new process that he had learned, and there was no concern for the person, and it was just horrifying. So process, the contrary would be process of a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good one. Thank you. So did anybody do what comes easy to us, what's more difficult? Was that an interesting perspective to take? I see a couple of people nodding.
I see Marcos.
Hi. Let me just jump in. Although the two guys, we were in the breakout room, sorry, about competencies, relationship awareness. Neither of us we are supervisors. Myself, I'm doing with a company that I'm working. We are doing group supervision. So I'm one of the mentors that is on this, usually every month or every 2 months over there. And the other person, I don't know, I think he's not here anymore. But for us, it's quite, let's say, I like to use the word funny. It's quite funny because as you can see, I'm not an English person, I'm Spanish. That's my accent is pretty obvious. And I'm working with a lot of people from the UK. And he is Indian and he's working in Germany. So the cultural things and the boundaries are just, let's say, complicated or different, okay? And we know each other, we got to the point that we know that kind of things, and that could lead us to a problem. And talking about the empathy, when you are setting the boundaries, that the things may be a lot of, with a huge difference when you're coming from another country or from another cultural perspective. As you may think, and anyone here, we are from everywhere in the world. We are from the south, from the north. So you can imagine how we are here in Spain. We like to touch, we like to hug, we like to kiss. And if you go to Germany, I've been working over there, so I know the people over there. It's not the same. It's not the same stuff. Okay.
Nope.
And even in the UK, I mean, the people is not. It's not. I was going to use the word friendly, but it's not friendly. It's a cultural thing that we love to feel the attraction of, I mean, the feeling of touching the people. So these kind of things, even when in front of the computer, we have to take a lot of care, because we can. It's a distance really complicated when you're coming from a culture, from our culture, to be close enough to do the job, but far away enough not to get too much involved. Okay, and this tiny little line, it's really a thin line that you have to take lots of care to set it at the right time. Because if it is passed away, then I mean there is no return. You have already passed it. That's it. That's the end of that line. You can set another one, but this one is already gone. It's just behind you. And that was talking. And another thing. Sorry, guys, if I'm talking too much, just let me know. And we were talking also about that someone, I think Gudrun was talking about it also. The relationship, knowing and Maureen, knowing about where the people is coming from, and knowing these kind of things a little bit ahead is always helping. But you never know the whole life of the other person till you met it. Perhaps he is from, let's say, like myself, from Spain, but my view of the world is a little bit different because I've been living in another parts of the world. So prejudge. Don't prejudge too much. Okay, that's a thing that we tend to do a lot in Spain, probably because we are from the south, and this is part of what we do, just talking behind the people. And we have to take a lot of care with that, because this is not going to make us a clear mind just to keep on working. And I think it works both for supervision and for coaching. I mean, normal coaching. So, and that's it.
So making sure we stay curious, huh?
Always curious. Okay, more than the cats.
Thank you, Marcos.
You're welcome.
Any other thoughts? Did anybody discover that they have a strong arm and a weaker arm? They use the same muscle all the time, or they have a preferred muscle that they use?
I'll jump in, because we did use the 4 questions. I was in competency 5, self-awareness. And so we tried to answer them all as a way of keeping the dialogue moving and getting out extra ideas. But obviously then it limits it a little bit to my saying, well, you know, I'm very frequently, I will share my own experience if it supports a supervisee's progress or situation that we're looking at. So that's something that's probably a go-to or an easy. And but each one of us had a different answer. I did raise a question, and it is something that interests me when they're talking about the supervisor, and it's not so much the question of being able to be open and learn and be curious, which came out as being something quite that we all shared. I'd say everyone in the group shared. I raised a question of between being willing to not know as a supervisor and having the expertise of a supervisor. That means when I'm looking for a supervisor and I pay a supervisor to walk me through something, an issue I'm dealing with, I expect them to have a certain knowledge of the competencies, of the ethics that are backing up what we do, the understanding of the definition of what coaching is. I expect a certain expertise. So the question is, where is that right balance between being comfortable not knowing, but also owning the expertise to supervise.
Look at the faces. You have lots of people smiling and thinking now, and I think that's another fine line there.
It is. I think it is. It's very
Great question.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Thank you, Patricia, for that. I think it's a really great question. And I would just, I don't know if that's proper at this moment, but I wanted to add to it one of my concerns that is all the time here, and that is where is the line of supervision and, let's say, mentoring the coach. I work a lot with young coaches and with coaches who are like developing and stuff, for example. So for me, you know, just to add to Patricia's question, for me, this is also something that's not completely clear line of how much is okay to share of my knowledge or my models or my, you know, and yeah, I think the difference between the mentoring as we understand it here in Europe, developmental mentoring and supervision, that's also somewhere there in something that's not completely clear to me up to these days after many years. Yeah, so thank you, Patricia, for that, really.
For me, I want to connect it to the poll results that we had at the beginning of this session, where 75% of the people said we want to work on our strength and not on our developmental areas. So that shows the inherent bias, perhaps, in a larger system as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting addition to the question, because while we want to work on our strength, we want to not have serious weaknesses where you need to have at least a certain level of expertise. So you need to look both sides and then develop wisely. So maybe this is a good time to go into our second breakout. What do you think, Cecile and Nicola?
Sounds good to me.
Perfect. So we will send you back for another 20 minutes in the breakout rooms, and you can continue that conversation that you were talking about before. And we would like you to now think back to the poll, think back to the discussion that we had and that you had in the breakout rooms, and think, how can you use what you learned about your own behaviors for your development? And how does your way of developing or your strategy for your own development impact the choices that you make about how you use the tool, how you approach the tool, how you would use it, how you interact with it in this session?
There's a question here about looking at strengths and non-strengths. Are non-strengths non-strengths, or are non-strengths weaknesses, or are they just non-strengths? Is a non-strength a weakness or just a non-strength?
Diane, do you want to hop in? And
do I want to confess, you mean? I confess to my group that I've been working, trained and learning from the Gallup organization, and I definitely drank the Kool-Aid. And so most of the time I work through strengths and little time on weaknesses. I couldn't even write weaknesses. I wrote non-strengths and I couldn't type it. So, and as I was saying to my group is, I think I'm strong there with my clients or supervisees or mentees. But there are still moments where with myself, I don't always stay focused on strengths. It's easy for me to fall back into, but I got to do this well too, which is sometimes impossible.
Sorry, can I jump in for a second, Diane? Is that your maximizer? I'm another strengths coach. No, I'm teasing.
No, I don't have maximizer.
Okay.
I don't, but that's a really good point. I don't know
that's
exactly
that strengths language. But in strengths language, we talk about overusing and underusing your strengths.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yes, yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
I think it's just trying to balance out my restorative, because I'm always looking at what's wrong, what's missing. So I overcompensate from that strength to look at strengths.
Mhm.
Thanks, Maureen.
Just before the hour, we just wanted to say thank you so much for coming. It's been really fun. We hope you're taking away some enthusiasm and passion and the joy of learning and playing in the things we know and the things we think we know.
Cecile, Petra, can I just say thank you so much on behalf of the EMCC Global for this discussion and for this valuable session.